My name is Emily Carter. I am 29 years old. 3 days after my father was buried, my older sister threw me out of the house we grew up in and told me I no longer belonged there. I was still wearing black when she stood in the hallway, arms crossed, and said the words that broke something inside me. She told me our father had trusted her, not me. She told me everything was hers now, and as I stood there with one suitcase, no job, no savings, and nowhere to go, I believed her. But what my sister did not know was that my father had left behind one secret that was about to destroy every lie she told. Before I tell you what happened, please like and subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you are watching from in the comments. Now let's begin. My father, Daniel Carter, was not a rich man. He was not famous either. He owned a small hardware store in our town, worked 6 days a week, and came home every evening smelling like wood dust and machine oil. But to me, he was everything steady in this world. After our mother died when I was 12, he became both parents at once. He learned how to braid my hair badly, how to make soup when I was sick, and how to sit up with me all night when I had nightmares. My sister Vanessa was 8 years older than me, so by the time I was a teenager, she was already acting less like a daughter and more like someone who believed she deserved to run the family. Vanessa always said she was the one who sacrificed the most. She liked saying that in front of other people, at church, at family dinners, even at my father's store. "I gave up my youth helping this family," she would sigh, loud enough for everyone to hear. But the truth was very different. She moved out at 21, married young, divorced even faster, and only came back around when she needed money. My father never said no to her. He paid her rent twice, helped her with car repairs, even covered her credit card debt once, though he thought I never knew. He kept forgiving her because that was the kind of man he was. I was the one who stayed. When his back began to fail, I worked extra hours at the store. When his blood pressure got worse, I drove him to appointments. When he forgot meals because he was tired, I cooked. I never thought of it as sacrifice. He was my father. That was enough. Then, 6 months before he died, everything changed. It started with the chest pains. He hid them at first. That was also like him. He would press his hand against his shirt, close his eyes for a moment, then smile and say he was fine. But one afternoon, he collapsed behind the counter at the store. I still remember the sound of the metal toolbox hitting the floor beside him. I remember screaming for help. I remember the ambulance lights flashing against the shop windows. And I remember the doctor later saying a sentence I was not ready to hear. "Your father's heart is very weak." After that, life became hospitals, medicines, paperwork, and fear. Vanessa started visiting more often then, which should have comforted me. Instead, it made me uneasy. She was too attentive, too sweet, too sudden. She brought fruit baskets my father never ate. She sat beside his bed, holding his hand, speaking in that soft voice she only used when she wanted something. Sometimes I would enter the room and find them both going quiet. One night, after I helped my father take his medicine, he asked me to close the bedroom door. His voice sounded tired. "Emily," he said, "there are some things I should have handled earlier." I sat beside him. "You don't have to talk right now. You need to rest." He looked at me in a way that made my chest tighten. "No, you need to listen." Then he reached into the drawer of his nightstand and took out a small brown envelope. My name was written on the front in his shaky handwriting. "Keep this safe," he said. I stared at it. "What is it?" He hesitated for a second. "Protection." I gave a nervous laugh because I thought he was being dramatic. Protection from what? His eyes shifted toward the door. Then he looked back at me and lowered his voice. "From what might happen after I'm gone." A cold feeling moved through me. "Dad, don't say that." He placed the envelope in my hands and closed my fingers around it. "Promise me something. Do not open it unless you absolutely have to. And no matter what Vanessa says later, do not let her pressure you." The moment he said her name, I felt something twist in my stomach. "Why would she pressure me?" I asked. But my father did not answer right away. He just leaned back against the pillow and closed his eyes, like even speaking had exhausted him. Then, very quietly, he said, "Because not everyone cries for the same reason at a funeral." I didn't understand what he meant then. I understood 3 weeks later, the day we buried him. The funeral was crowded. My father had helped so many people in our town that the church was full long before the service began. Customers from the store came, neighbors came, even old men I had not seen in years came to stand by his casket with tears in their eyes. Vanessa cried the loudest of all. She wore an expensive black dress, dramatic dark glasses, and kept leaning into people as if she could barely stand from grief. More than once, I saw her glance around to make sure everyone was watching. I was too numb to think much about it. I just wanted the day to end. But that evening, after the last relatives left and the house finally became quiet, Vanessa called me into my father's study. And the moment I walked in, I realized something was very wrong. She was sitting behind my father's desk. That alone made my skin crawl. His chair had always been his place. Even when he got sick, he still sat there to do store paperwork, pay bills, or write little notes to himself on yellow pads. Seeing Vanessa in that chair, with her legs crossed and a folder open in front of her, felt wrong in a way I cannot fully explain. It was like watching someone step into a life that was not theirs before the body was even cold. "There you are," she said. Her voice had changed. The sadness was gone, completely gone. No trembling, no tears, just that sharp, flat tone I knew too well. I stayed near the door. "What is this?" She tapped the folder. "Reality." Then she slid a paper across the desk toward me. "Read it." I walked forward slowly and picked it up. It was a photocopy of what looked like some legal document. My eyes were still swollen from crying, so the words blurred at first. But then I saw enough to understand what she wanted me to think. It looked like my father had left the house, the store, and almost all his assets to Vanessa as the executor and primary beneficiary. I felt the air leave my lungs. "What?" I whispered. Vanessa leaned back and folded her arms. "Dad trusted me to handle things." "That doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense," she snapped. "I'm older, I'm more experienced. I know how to manage the store. I know how to deal with taxes, debts, legal issues. You," she looked me up and down, "you're emotional. You were just living here, helping out. That doesn't mean he wanted you in charge of anything." Her words hit me one after another. I stared at the page again. Something felt off, but grief makes your mind weak. Everything inside me was still broken from the funeral. I wanted to argue. I wanted to shout that I had been the one taking care of him while she showed up only when it suited her. But I could barely think straight. "I don't understand," I said. "He never told me this." Vanessa gave a cold little smile. "Of course he didn't. He knew you'd take it badly." I looked up at her. "Take what badly?" "That he believed in me more than you." There are words that sting, and there are words that leave a mark you can feel for years. That was one of them. She stood up then and walked around the desk. "I'm trying to be practical, Emily. The house has to be settled. The store has to be reviewed. There are debts. There are decisions to make. I can't do that with you under my feet, crying in every room." I stared at her, not fully understanding what she was saying. Then she looked straight at my suitcase sitting by the wall, my small blue suitcase, the one I used only on rare trips. That is when I realized she had already packed some of my things. My voice came out thin. "What did you do?" "I packed what you need for now," she said. "The rest can be sorted later." "For now?" I repeated. She did not blink. "You need to leave tonight." For a moment, I honestly thought I had heard her wrong. "Tonight?" "Yes." "Vanessa." I took a step toward her. "Dad was buried this afternoon." "And?" I just stared at her. She sighed like I was the one making things difficult. "Emily, please don't start. I have enough on my shoulders already. You can stay with a friend, get a motel, figure something out." "But you can't stay here. This is my home." "No," she said, suddenly harder. "It was your home. Now it's part of an estate that I control." The cruelty of that sentence almost made me dizzy. I shook my head slowly. "You can't do this." "I already did." Then she walked to the hallway closet, took out my coat, and tossed it onto the suitcase. I wish I could say I fought harder in that moment. I wish I could say I grabbed the papers and ripped them in half or screamed until the neighbors heard me. But grief had hollowed me out. I was exhausted, shocked, and still trying to understand how the same sister who had cried over our father's casket just hours earlier was now throwing me out like trash. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. She shrugged. "That's not my problem." That was when I realized this was not sudden. She had planned it. She had waited until the funeral was over, waited until everyone left, waited until there were no witnesses. Then she had moved. My throat burned. "You were waiting for him to die." Her face changed for just a second. Not guilt, annoyance. "Be very careful what you accuse me of," she said. I looked at her and whispered, "You couldn't even wait one day." Instead of answering, she opened the front door. The night air rushed in, cold, sharp, merciless. She stood there with the door open and said, "Either you walk out with dignity, or I call someone to remove you. Your choice." I looked past her at the dark porch, at the driveway where my father's truck was still parked, at the porch light he always forgot to turn off. Everything felt unreal, like I had stepped into someone else's nightmare. My hands were shaking when I reached for the suitcase handle. Vanessa moved aside and let me pass. When I stood on the porch, she added one last thing. "Oh, and Emily." I turned. She smiled. "Dad loved you, but love and trust are not the same thing." Then she closed the door in my face. I stood there for a full minute, maybe longer, unable to move. I could hear the lock click from inside. I remember that sound more clearly than I remember parts of the funeral. That small metallic click. Final. Cold. Clean. I slept in my car that night. I parked 2 streets away because I could not bear to sit outside the house and stare at those windows. The November air was freezing, and I had only a thin blanket in the back seat. Around midnight, I started crying so hard I had to press both hands over my mouth to stop myself from making noise. Not because anyone would hear me, but because once the sound started, it felt like it might never stop. The next morning, I went to the bank and checked my account. It was worse than I thought. I had enough money for maybe 10 days if I was careful, 2 weeks if I ate almost nothing. My part-time bookkeeping work for the store had stopped the moment my father collapsed months earlier. Most of my time had gone into caring for him. I had no apartment, no stable job, and no plan. I called Vanessa twice that day. She did not answer. I texted her and asked for time to collect the rest of my things. She replied with just 4 words, "I'll let you know." That was when anger finally began pushing through the grief. Not loud anger at first, quiet anger, the kind that sits in your chest and grows heavier every hour. By evening, I drove to my friend Melissa's apartment. She let me stay on her couch without asking many questions. The moment she saw my face, she just opened the door and hugged me. I did not know how badly I needed that until I nearly collapsed into her arms. For the next few days, I moved like someone underwater. I applied for jobs, I made calls about short-term work, I tried to think, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vanessa sitting in my father's chair. Then, on the 4th night after the funeral, while Melissa was asleep and the apartment was quiet, I remembered the envelope, the brown envelope my father had pressed into my hands. Protection. My heart started pounding so fast it almost hurt. I had shoved it deep into my tote bag and forgotten about it in the shock of everything that happened. My fingers were trembling when I pulled it out. My name was still written on the front in his handwriting. The sight of it made my eyes fill immediately. For a long moment, I just held it. Then I opened it, and what I found inside changed everything. My hands were shaking as I slowly pulled the contents out of the envelope. There were 3 things inside: a folded document, a small USB drive, and a handwritten letter. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I unfolded the letter first because seeing my father's handwriting felt like hearing his voice again. My eyes blurred instantly as I began to read. "Emily, if you are reading this, it means things did not go the way I hoped.
I wanted to believe everything would be fair after I was gone, but I have learned something very difficult over the past year. Not everyone around me has honest intentions. My chest tightened. I don't know how things will unfold, but I need you to trust yourself. You have always been stronger than you think. There are things you don't know yet, things I kept quiet about because I didn't want to create conflict while I was alive. My hands trembled harder. Vanessa has been pressuring me for control of everything, the store, the house, my accounts. I refused, not because I don't love her, but because I don't trust her decisions. My heart dropped. I made arrangements to protect what I built, and to protect you. I had to stop reading for a second. Tears were falling onto the paper. Then I forced myself to continue. The documents in this envelope will explain everything. Do not confront her immediately. Observe first, and when the time is right, act. The last line made my breath catch. I am sorry you have to go through this, but I believe in you. Dad. I sat there frozen. Everything he said was happening exactly like he feared. Slowly, I wiped my eyes and reached for the folded document. It was not just any document, it was the real will. Not a copy, not a draft. The original, signed and stamped. And as my eyes moved across the page, my entire world shifted. The house was in my name. The store was in my name. His primary accounts were in my name. Vanessa was not the main beneficiary. She wasn't even close. My father had left her a fixed amount of money, but everything else, everything that mattered, was mine. I stopped breathing. That's not possible, I whispered to myself. But it was. And then I understood. The paper Vanessa showed me was fake. A cold wave of realization washed over me. She hadn't just thrown me out, she had lied. She had planned this. She thought I knew nothing. My eyes slowly moved to the USB drive. My fingers hesitated for a moment before I plugged it into Melissa's laptop. The screen lit up. There were several audio files. My heart started pounding again. I clicked the first one. At first, there was silence. Then I heard a voice. Vanessa's voice. He's getting weaker. It's only a matter of time. Another voice followed. A man's voice. Are you sure the paperwork will hold? Vanessa laughed softly. Of course, he barely reads anything now. I just need him to sign when he's tired. He trusts me. My blood ran cold. The audio continued. And Emily? The man asked. Vanessa's tone changed. She's not a problem. She's too emotional. She won't question anything. And even if she does, it'll be too late. I froze. Every word felt like a knife. There were more files, more conversations, more proof. By the time I finished listening, my hands were no longer shaking. They were steady, very steady. Something inside me had changed. For the first time since my father died, I wasn't just hurt. I was awake. The next morning, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I made a plan. I contacted the lawyer whose name was listed on the will. His office confirmed everything. The document I had was the legally registered version. Anything else was invalid. When I asked about my rights, he paused for a moment and then said something that made my heart beat differently. Miss Carter, legally speaking, everything your sister is doing right now is unauthorized. I closed my eyes for a second. Meaning the house, the business, and all associated assets belong to you. That was the moment everything became clear. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to beg. I didn't need to prove anything emotionally. I just needed to wait and execute. For the next 2 weeks, I stayed quiet. I didn't contact Vanessa again. I didn't confront her. Instead, I let her feel comfortable, let her believe she had won. Meanwhile, with the lawyer's help, we prepared everything: legal notices, ownership confirmation, financial audits, and most importantly, a meeting. Vanessa loved appearances, so we used that. She had already started making changes to the store, trying to act like the owner, talking to suppliers, making decisions, even telling employees she was restructuring things. So we arranged an official business meeting. She didn't hesitate to accept. Why would she? In her mind, she was already in control. The day of the meeting, I stood outside the store for a second before walking in. It felt different. Not because the building had changed, but because I had. Inside, several people were already there: 2 lawyers, an accountant, and Vanessa. The moment she saw me, her expression shifted from surprise to irritation. "Well," she said, crossing her arms, "look who decided to come back." I didn't respond. I simply walked in and took a seat. She let out a small laugh. "This isn't a place for emotional scenes, Emily. We're discussing serious matters." One of the lawyers spoke calmly. "That's exactly why she's here." Vanessa frowned slightly. "What?" The lawyer opened a folder. "Let's begin." For the next few minutes, he spoke clearly and professionally, explaining that there had been a review of all estate documents. Vanessa sat back confidently at first. Then the words started to change. "The document currently being used by Miss Vanessa Carter has been found to be invalid." Her smile faded. "What?" The lawyer continued. "The original, legally binding will names Miss Emily Carter as the sole primary beneficiary." Silence. Complete silence. Vanessa blinked. Then she laughed. "That's ridiculous." But no one else was laughing. The lawyer calmly placed the original will on the table. "In addition, we have evidence suggesting attempted manipulation of documentation." Vanessa's face turned pale. I watched her carefully. For the first time, she looked unsure. The accountant added, "All current control of the store and property must be transferred immediately." Vanessa stood up suddenly. "This is insane. She doesn't know anything about running this business." That was the moment I finally spoke. My voice was calm. "I've been running it for months." She froze. I continued, "While you were busy visiting occasionally, I was there every day." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Then the lawyer said the final thing. "We also have audio evidence that may be relevant if this proceeds further legally." That was it. That was the moment everything broke. Vanessa's confidence shattered. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time, not just as the emotional younger sister, but as someone she had completely underestimated. "You," she whispered. I held her gaze. "You thought I knew nothing." No anger, no shouting, just truth. Within minutes, everything was decided. She had no control, no authority, no power, and for the first time, no advantage. She left the store that day without saying another word, not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. In the weeks that followed, everything slowly returned to stability. The house, my home, was mine again. The store reopened under proper management, and the life I thought I had lost came back in a way I never expected. But the biggest change wasn't the house or the business, it was me, because I finally understood something my father tried to teach me without saying it directly. Being quiet doesn't mean being weak, and sometimes the strongest move is waiting for the right moment to speak. Vanessa never apologized, and honestly, she didn't need to, because losing everything she tried to steal was already the answer. And for the first time since that night she closed the door on me, I wasn't standing outside anymore. I was home.